Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Podcast. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Jake Meloche. Jake, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm excited to chat with you. We've had a good conversation, off the air about cloud native security and things like that. But for folks that don't know you or haven't come across you yet, can you tell us a bit about your background and what you're up to now?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a senior solutions architect at Aqua Security. So pre-sales engineer, if you're not familiar with the solutions architect title. But before that, I was actually still in college. This was my first job out of college. So I went for computer science. I got my bachelor's degree there. Realized I didn't really want to develop at that point. So I was looking for other roles. And my soft skills are more developed, I think, than a lot of other people that come out with a cybersecurity degree. So I think sales was a natural switch into that for me, being the bridge between technical and the business side. So I started as like an entry level associate, got a really robust training program to get familiar with all the tech that came out when I was in college that they weren't going to teach me, and then really hit the ground running from there. So I've been working with some of the biggest organizations, Fortune 500, some of the biggest agencies that in the government. So really just kind of excelled from that point on. And Aqua's been great to me from so far. So
Yeah, it's awesome. You said a couple of things that I have to pull the thread on now. You talked about like the soft skills aspect, So I'm curious, like you kind of seem like you jump, feet first into the fire from college directly to working in sales and working with, customers or potential customers, leads, things like that. How often do you think that soft skills are kind of undervalued in our career field? We focus a lot on the technical aspects of, cloud technology, security, things like that. But you kind of emphasize the soft skills communications aspect. Any thoughts on that front?
yeah, I think it's huge because especially from my perspective, there's a wide range of personas that I talk to on a daily basis. So like you could have the CISO types who aren't in the weeds as much as some of the developers or engineers that I work with on a day-to-day basis, that some of the topics I'm trying to discuss might go right over their heads unless I can get them down into more plain terms. And that's something that I picked up in college because I played rugby in college, so the guys that I lived with didn't necessarily have a lot of technical skills or didn't know a lot about what I was trying to say. So when I wanted to just talk to them about whatever, I had to get it down to the ways that they would understand, not just talking to myself, essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's super important to be able to communicate, beyond the technical stuff or put it in a language that the business peers or other, folks can understand for sure. And then the other thing I wanted to ask about is like the pre-sales aspect. I feel like in that kind of a role, you may get a lot of exposure to, not just one organization's problems or challenges around cloud security and things like that, but a lot of different organizations. How beneficial has that been to, as you go through your career learning and growing and like trying to help organizations tackle challenges because you get this plethora of exposure rather than just one organization, one architecture, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's been huge for me. And it's been really apparent as I've gone through the last couple of years where it's like earlier or one of my first couple of years, I was like, I don't really have a big good grasp on a lot of the tools or a lot of the processes that we're going through. But now it's more of like I'm a jack of all trades. It's not just I know one cloud provider or I know one build system or I know one specific tool. I have been using all of them across the board for the last 4 years. So I am very familiar with the Amazons, the Azures, the Googles, the whatever registry you could ever think of, all of those different types of tools. So it's really given me a leg up when I go into a new engagement with an organization that I am probably familiar with the tools that they're using or the processes that they're trying to install there.
Yeah, it makes sense. I work in a consulting role, and I've found, being in this kind of a role gives me a lot of different exposure to different problems, organizations, politics, you name it. So it kind of benefits you when you walk into a new engagement or working with a new customer, basically, having that exposure. So, you kind of jumped right into the cloud. If I had to suspect, you likely hadn't worked much in on-premise legacy data center, type stuff. But in
Right.
your experience so far, helping organizations migrate to the cloud, focus on cloud security, cloud native security, what are some of the key differences that people are starting to struggle with when they move to the cloud and start to try to tackle securing cloud environments versus maybe their legacy on-premise environment?
Yeah, so I think I might have gotten lucky with my schooling because my professor for when I was going through was really keen on like the agile method of development, which was probably it was fairly new when I was going through, but they were keen on not having a siloed way of development, and that's something that we're seeing now with cloud native because there's less dependencies on the actual machines that you're running these applications on. Because when you go to a cloud, especially like in a containerized world, they're meant to be able to be puzzle pieces that can fit into wherever they need to go. So one of the age old things that we used to say is like the application works on my machine, That's not a thing anymore with cloud native, because the dependency from like the operating system or whatever else gets taken away because it's all packaged inside of that container that's right there, or whatever other cloud native avenue you're taking, whether it be serverless or whether it be something else. So really, like um, the culture around the development has started to change, not only with the siloed development going away and more talking around collaboration between those different development teams, but also then like there's a starting to see more of a shift now with like the DevSecOps movement, not just the dev versus the operations, but trying to make sure that security is a part of everyone's mind, because it ultimately makes the applications safer, better, saves everyone time at the end of the day.
Yeah, it makes sense. And you kind of hinted on some of the key aspects of cloud native technologies: the ephemeral nature, the immutable aspect of containers, for example, being able to move them around different environments, cloud service providers, and so on. And a lot of these concepts may be new to people, just like a lot of the terms. And we were joking off air. There's a lot of acronyms. Think about CWPP, CSPM, KSPM. Can you unpack some of those acronyms for folks and kind of where things are headed, where you think things are evolving in terms of cloud protections and platforms?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know how many terms are out there right now. There's probably got to be like 100 of them, but I'm sure there's going to be more even tomorrow. But like CWPP, Cloud Workload Protection Platform, or CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management, KSPM, just specific for Kubernetes. All of those tools are referencing a specific type of, or a different type of strategy or thing you're looking to be able to do as far as your security goes. So it could be like for posture management, you're looking to make sure your configurations are in the right in the right place, whether it be versus best practice or a different industry standard for whatever vertical you need. Or it could be monitor like workload protection. So the workloads that are actively running, you want to monitor to make sure that those types of things are doing what they're intended to do. There's no adverse effects from happening there. But really, what we're seeing now is the newest term I think that Gartner's coined is CNAPP, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. And we were just talking about cloud native there for a second. So it's really where all of those different capabilities are starting to get rolled up under one tool, or trying to get rolled up under one tool as much as they can. So that way there's a better um, view of your full risk, because a lot of those tools are looking for just one specific vector, but a lot of times those vectors might be relating to the same asset that you have in your environment. So when you have multiple findings from multiple different tools for that same asset, most organizations these days are doing that kind of correlation on the outside, like in a sim tool, or somebody's doing that correlation. But with CNAPP, those types of things are happening out of the box. So that's the intention, anyways. So that way, exactly from your workload, or from your, let's just call it, when we shift left and we go and looking at the vulnerabilities that's moving through our image pipeline. We know where those vulnerabilities are sitting in your workloads, but we also know what resources those workloads use to like the security groups or anything like that that might be misconfigured. They're now being used by this resource to reach the internet, or to whatever else it might need. Those types of correlations make the risk of that particular asset or that workload much greater than just finding one specific vulnerability, or like one critical vulnerability. So being able to prioritize those different findings based off of the compound risk that happens is, I think, really what the strategy of CNAPPs is meant to be.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, because that organizational or environmental specific context is crucial. Otherwise, it's just like, oh, it's a critical finding. Well, what does that mean exactly? Like, what kind of asset is impacting what data is on that system? What other systems can reach that system? How can lateral movement occur? Things like that. So I think that context is critical. And then on that note, there's another topic that we talked about, kind of tool sprawl or cognitive overload. If you have a CSPM and CWPP and like all these different tools in the pipeline and all that, we're seeing kind of a push, like you talked about, to CNAPP, more of a platform type approach to bring a lot of these capabilities together. Why do you think it's so important to do that? Have this platform type approach rather than all these disparate tools that you're kind of trying to jump from one tool to the other, bring it all together, make sense of it. Why do you think we're seeing the industry move this way?
Well, you said it exactly. Like, alert fatigue is a big problem for a lot of organizations, and with security tools nowadays, I'm not surprised, because you generate so many different things from all of these tools. Even the individual point solutions, like we mentioned, not even just from a CNAPP tool, where it could be like millions of vulnerabilities from across all of your repositories, or the same number of misconfigurations because there's twice as many resources deployed in your cloud environment. But when we're talking about that correlation of data points is really when that alert fatigue starts to fall. Because let's say that you had a critical vulnerability that you found across 200 of your images. But if those images are just statically sitting in your registry, they're an old image tag that's been resolved, that one isn't getting deployed anymore. That's not really a critical issue for you because that isn't going to be sitting in your environment. It's not a vulnerability that's going to get exploited. It's not a vulnerability that could potentially cause an outage for your organization or have an impact because it's not really running. So unless you can be able to tell or make that filtering or that correlation between what vulnerabilities or what misconfigurations I actually have and how they relate to what's actually running in my environment right now, that is where a CNAPP would be able to kind of drop that alert fatigue, because you would go to try to make those correlation points before you send out alerts, or make sure that they're pinpointed to the correct people. So that way it's not millions of alerts getting sent out to a single stream that ultimately everybody's going to ignore because they're getting pinged every 20 seconds for whatever's getting found.
Yeah, I think that part's particularly important. If we try to build trust, like we talked about DevSecOps, if we try to build trust and rapport with our engineering and development peers, instead of just throwing them a massive spreadsheet of 7,000 vulnerabilities, we're showing them, hey, here's the ones that are most important, not just based on the severity, but of the organizational context, what's reachable, what's actually running, the type of data on the system, things like that. And I think that the platform is what really brings all that together. So we talk a lot, as well. You talk about DevSecOps. There's obviously a push to like shift security left and things like CI/CD security and running tools in the pipeline. But I know you're also passionate about runtime security. Can you unpack what that is exactly and why it's so important compared to, say, shift left or pipeline scans, things of that nature?
Yeah, well, so when we're talking about doing image scanning and finding all of these issues, we can do as much as we can to be able to fix those vulnerabilities in on the left side in the development environment. But the fact of the matter is the 0-day vulnerabilities is always at risk. So you have no idea when that's going to happen, and it's why it's called the 0-day, because it doesn't happen tomorrow, it doesn't happen yesterday, it happens right now. And so those types of vulnerabilities is really where you want to make sure that you can monitor your applications in real time. So that way, in the worst case scenario, like we saw almost 2 years ago to the day, Log4j, where I had customers calling me on my cell phone, which never happened before, saying, "Hey, we need to know where this vulnerability is. We need to know if we're susceptible to this. Can you help me do this?" And so I was like, "Of course, yeah." We knew about Log4j like a couple of days early because of us being a security vendor. We heard it through the grapevine that this was coming out, so we kind of were prepared to be able to help these customers out. I think we had tagged it early with our own before the official CVE had gotten released, so we knew what we were actually looking for. Um, but in the sense of Log4j, what happened was basically people were able to execute whatever they wanted on applications that were susceptible to that. So if you don't have runtime monitoring, even if I was looking at the logs of every single container that I could run, which is not feasible from a human perspective, there is still a chance that I wouldn't be able to see the execution of any of those things, because it could be like 2,000ths of a second between the drop of an executable and the actual execution of it. And I wouldn't be able to react fast enough to be able to stop that or triage that. And I would know what asset it was if I was watching it. But even then, the damage could have already be done at that point. So unless you're doing this real-time monitoring, you're still susceptible to those types of attacks from a 0-day perspective, or whatever else might be happening. If it's not even a 0-day, if someone just happens to gain access to one of your assets because of a misconfiguration, like we mentioned before, then you could do all of the vulnerability scanning and all of the everything you wanted to do on the left. But what really comes down to is when you're going to get attacked, it's going to be what's on the right in the running environment.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Like, yeah, obviously, ideally, we want to catch as much as we can in the pipeline and shift security left. Obviously, a lot of people make the case it saves money and resources and minimizes attack exposure. But ultimately, despite our best efforts to push towards a get out model where nothing's being modified in production or a runtime environment is happening quite frequently still, things happen after the pipeline, like you talked about in production. So having that production runtime context is absolutely critical to understand like what's really happening in my production environment to my systems that's exposing me to risk. So I want to ask, a lot of these topics we talked about from the CNAPP perspective, cloud native security, CI/CD pipeline security, software supply chain security with Log4j, leads to what you all do at Aqua Security. Do you want to take a few minutes and talk about Aqua in particular? What your platform does, how you've seen it successfully implemented, with some customers in regulated environments, for example, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're fitting directly into that category, CNAPP, so Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. And really what that encompasses is being able to have the full view of your application from development all the way through to that runtime security, and being able to make those data points connect when you have a certain development environment, um, that is get like a developer that's working on a specific application that's going through a specific pipeline that might be configured in certain ways, which again, with the supply chain security when the SolarWinds attack, we had again, that's another thing where it's not only the code that has to go through your pipeline, it's also the build runners, or in SolarWinds case, it was the Jenkins build runners that were actually being compromised, not the code. So monitoring those types of systems is something that not a lot of people are doing, that we're providing to our customers, as well as being able to make sure that the configurations of the supporting resources or the cloud are up to snuff, and then providing that runtime protection in real time. Where in the case of like Log4j, we have a feature called drift prevention, which basically completely wiped out whatever anybody was trying to be able to execute from Log4j, because if they tried to drop something to deploy a crypto miner or whatever, they'd have to execute that command. And we would be able to see that that wasn't something that was supposed to happen on those assets. So we could prevent that right out of the gate. And we did that with some of our customers right then, and they credit us for being able to help them prevent any issues from Log4j. So really being able to take all of those different pieces, and regardless of the type of environment, we actually are in progress right now for FedRAMP High for our SaaS solution. So by I would say mid-time next year, we're going to be fully ready to go for whatever type of environment that you need to be able to have the security on, regardless of if it be on-prem or in one of the major CSPs. We can be able to help you out in all of those different solutions.
Very cool. Yeah, sounds good. It brings together a lot of different tools and security functionality that we just talked about, brings it together in a comprehensive platform, and you're doing it in highly regulated environments. Having FedRAMP High around the corner obviously speaks to serving the federal government, Department of Defense, things like that. So that's very cool. Definitely, folks, check it out. I shared it here in the comments, but aquasec.com. So Jake, one last question that I ask every guest here on the show is, what does the term cyber resilience mean to you?
Yeah, well, resilience itself is like the ability to react or be prepared for whatever comes your way. And so in cyber, when you want to be able to be resilient, it really speaks volumes as to being able to have or have your readiness for when an attack happens. It's not for when you go after the fact of when an attack's already in progress or has already been detonated. You want to make sure that when those things happen, inevitably it will for whichever organization you are. It's not a if, it's a when for sure. So when you have those types of things, if you're really monitoring each part of the life cycle of the application from the development to the deployment and to the runtime, if you have things in place that can even be like the runtime should be the last line of defense if we're catching everything in the shift left. But if you have all of those pieces in play, you know that you can have that peace of mind knowing we're going to be able to catch whatever attacks come in progress. And even if it's some brand new, extremely sophisticated attack that no one's ever seen before, at least we'll be able to get to be the hardest person that they could potentially attack from that standpoint. So really just being able to have the ability when there is this inevitable attack to withstand and or react quickly to that type of thing.
Yeah, well said. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So well said. Yeah, we covered a lot of ground here. Cloud native security, different acronyms and the acronym soup of cloud native security. I talked about CNAPP and the need for a comprehensive platform, as well as a little bit about the Aqua Security team. So definitely check that out, aquasec.com. And Jake, thanks so much for coming on. That'll take us out for this week. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.